Okay friends, it's time to get started on replacing our electronic clock spring. Before we continue and take apart anything on the steering column, let's make our way into the trunk and disconnect the negative battery terminal. Once the trunk's open, go ahead and carefully lift up on your carpeting. We'll set that aside. We're going to remove the black terminal here. That's the negative battery terminal. To do that, we'll use a 10mm. We'll loosen this nut just enough to remove the terminal from the battery. Set that aside so it's making no contact with the terminal. Now after the car sat for a little while with the battery fully disconnected, at this point we should be clear to make our way over to the steering column. Looking along each side of the steering column, you're going to find a hole. It's going to be a little bit smaller than this hole, but essentially all you need to do is take a screwdriver and you're going to be looking inside here for a little metallic rod. We want to press directly against it. And then once you're up against it and pressing, you would continue on by trying to pull the horn pad away from the steering column. We can carefully pull this away. Keep in mind it does still have wiring attached to it. Looking behind this, you're going to find two wiring harnesses. They are color-coded, so when you go to reconnect it, you want to make sure you put them back in the exact same position. Don't put the white to the pink connector. We'll carefully start removing this by gently lifting up on the yellow locking tab. Once that's unlocked, continue on with some long nose pliers. We're going to use these along each side of this. You're going to find two squeeze tabs. Just gently go ahead and squeeze on those tabs and then lift this up and off. Give it a quick inspection and then do the same to the other. With that out of the way, let's continue up along this area. We're going to start disconnecting the wiring that comes up into here. You can see that you have this blue area of a connector. If you were to make your way along the forward side of that, there's going to be a tab that you get underneath with a small screwdriver. Gently lift it up and you should be able to remove the wiring from the area. Let's move along to our center nut. Now there's a couple things to think about for this center nut. When you remove it, it's going to have a splined area in there that the steering wheel needs to fit perfectly onto. Once you remove this and remove the steering wheel, you need to make sure it's fully aligned. So we'll go ahead and remove the nut, and then I'm going to show you how to mark the area. We'll use a 21mm to remove this. You want to give that nut a close inspection. Make sure it doesn't look broken, worn, or damaged in any way. Now if you were to look at the shaft coming out of the steering column, you can see that it has a mark. Right there. It's got a little line. Now what I want to do is actually mark the steering wheel in the same exact position as where that mark is. So when I go to put this back together, it's as close as possible. Keep in mind, you will need to get a four-wheel alignment after this is done. Now that I have this marked, I also want to point just above it. There's a little triangle there, which essentially is also an alignment point. So let's go ahead and mark that again. There we are. All three of these areas line up perfectly. We can continue. At this point, commonly, people will use a steering wheel puller. You're going to try to grab onto the inside of these two ears along the sides of the shaft, and then have a driver coming in through the center. You'll continue by screwing it together, and that's going to push the driver in while pulling the two ears out. That's going to pull the steering wheel away. Not everybody has that tool. If that's the case, go ahead and grab on 3 and 9 on the steering wheel. We're going to carefully try to wiggle this back and forth just enough while we're pulling it to try to separate it. Keep in mind, there could still be things attached that you want to pay attention to, so don't just go ahead and pull it off all willy-nilly. We're going to pull our wires straight on through here. Now we can set our steering wheel aside. Next, we're going to have to remove 4 mounting screws. They're going to be located behind this area. To gain access, we're going to use a trim tool, and we want to carefully get in between here and separate the top clamshell from the bottom. As you can tell, ours kind of popped apart a little bit, but generally you just come right in here. There's a tab. Push on that, give it a little twist. You're going to find a couple push tabs back here, but we're not necessarily worried about those so much because we're not going to fully take this apart. Carefully get in here, pop that one as well. Well, that exposes the top 2 screws right here, but we need to get to this lower driver's side one. You'll notice as you try to pull this down, it just doesn't have enough slack. Let's move underneath the steering column and remove this one 7mm headed bolt. Now we can carefully pull this down a little bit and we have full access to all 4 of our mounting screws. We'll use a Phillips head screwdriver to remove them. Now we can carefully grab onto this. We're going to give it a little wiggle and remove it from the steering column. As it starts coming away, you're going to notice that you have a little bit more wiring coming across the back. Let's go ahead and disconnect that now. Looking at the back side here, we're going to start with the yellow connector. To remove the yellow connector, we'll start with the red locking tab. Go ahead and pop that out of its locked in position. There we are. With the lock out of there, let's continue on into this area. We want to carefully use a pick. I'm going to carefully press down on the yellow, pry up against the black, and press this out. We can set that aside. Now we can move along to the other connector. For this, I'm going to continue using my pick. In the center, there's going to be a tab that you can carefully get underneath, gently pry it up, and pull out the wiring. Now we can carefully remove this from the vehicle. There it is, friends. Okay, friends, it's time to install our brand new clock spring assembly. You're going to find that this is the exact same thing as the original, in exception of this one piece right here. On your original clock spring, it actually has a mechanism inside that's supposed to make it so you can go ahead and turn your wheel without damaging your wiring by twisting it up like this. But if you were to turn it too far, you hear that grinding noise? That's the sound of the clock spring inside going bad. At this point, if you were to continually twist this like this, you just ruined the brand new clock spring. So with that said, we'll leave this in position until we're ready to remove it. Let's continue with the wiring that leads to the back. I'm going to start with the larger harness. Press it in, listen for a click. Give it a tug, make sure it's secure. Now we'll do the same for the yellow. Once we've given it our tug, make sure you lock it in with the red locking connector. Double check it. It needs to be 100% secure. Now we can take this and we'll put it in position in the steering column. You'll notice where the mounting bolt holes are, there's a little tab that sticks up. And on the clock spring itself, it has an alignment hole for that particular tab. Go ahead and line them up. Slide it in position, and then start in all 4 of your mounting bolts. With all of them started, we can snug each of them up. Now we can move up along the top. We're just going to bring this back down into its position. You want to pay attention to this bezel that comes along here. You want to make sure that the plastic trim makes its way behind it. Now this is something you want to pay attention to on the passenger side, and of course on the driver's side. Slide this down and in. Now at this point, these should want to lock in. There we are. Just make sure I've got this behind where it belongs as well. So now that we have our trim panels back on, let's go ahead and put in our lower mounting bolt. Now we can move along up here. To remove this, I'm going to hold onto the clock spring assembly. Carefully grab onto this and pull it off. Now at this point, you need to be extremely careful. You don't want to turn this without having it in position. Now we can carefully grab the wiring and we're going to put it through the back side of the steering wheel. We want to put it through along the driver's side of the steering wheel here. Pull that wiring through. Now let's go ahead and take the steering wheel and we'll slide it in position. We want to try to line up all 3 of our alignment points. Once it's lined up, go ahead and slide it right on there. You want the splines to line up perfectly. If it seems like it's off by even 1 tooth, just carefully pull it back off and realign it. Time to reconnect our electrical connector. We'll take it so the locking tab area is facing up. Press it in, listen for a click. Give it a tug, make sure it's secure. Let's apply some blue thread locker to the threaded area of the steering shaft. Now we can reinstall our mounting nut. For this, you can find that you have a neoprene locker on it on one side and then only threading on the other. The threaded side goes facing towards the shaft. Go ahead and start it on there by hand. Now we'll bottom this out, and then when we torque it, we'll torque it to 30 foot-pounds. Now it's going to be time to reinstall our horn pad. You want to be very careful, like I said, for the electrical connectors. If you look closely at each one of them, you're going to find that they are a little different. It's almost impossible to mix them up. But either way, be very careful not to. We're going to line up the alignment tabs and slide it right in. Listen for a click, give it a tug, lock it down with the yellow connecting locker. The white connector goes to the white port, press it in, click, give it a tug, lock it down. Now we're going to get ready to reattach this to the steering wheel. You can see you have these two bezeled areas. They need to fit into the steering wheel. Once you press it in, you're going to hear a click from both sides as they snap into their locking points. We'll slide this in, being very careful for our wiring that's located behind it. Now I'm going to gently press and listen. I heard 2 clicks. I'll let it go and gently try to pull it away. I'm not trying to break the steering wheel in any way, but I do want to make sure it's safe and secured. Now we can make our way back into the trunk. Let's reconnect our negative battery terminal. Press that down as far as it can go, and then tighten your 10mm headed nut. Make sure it's nice and tight, and then put your carpet back. Okay friends, we got the car back together. What's left to do now? Now of course you're going to put the key in the on position, test the horn, make sure it functions properly, and also you want to make sure you don't have an airbag light. Aside from that, thanks for watching.